we go. Hi, y'all. I am very excited this evening to be here with my friend Keo Match, a creative I met when we worked at Head Jam 1 million years ago.
So long ago, so very long ago.
Thank you so much. Keo and I have been chatting about street art before we started this interview, and now he is happy and is graciously offering me some of his time to talk about what his life has been like as he's just moved from Melbourne, which was in the midst of extreme lockdown, to London. So yeah, before we talk about that, Keo, just quickly tell me a little bit more about your life and what you do. briefly, few sentences.
Okay, briefly. I guess my life for the last 10 years has been pretty much all focused around any creative pursuit. So it started with graphic design, moved into illustration, then animation, then street art, murals, that kind of thing. And then in most recent times, it's been augmented reality works, which also, kind of play into the painting, street art, sculptural stuff that I've been doing. So,
right.
Yeah, that's what I've been doing.
Yeah, very good.
As well as getting married, meeting the love of my life. Yes. That was a couple of years ago, but we're moving around the world. It's all been going on.
So, what were you doing? Tell me about what your life was like, what you were doing in Melbourne before the pandemic hit. So January, February, what were you, and tell me how your life changed. Kind of take me along that trajectory if you can.
Well, January, February, so end of 2019, beginning of 2020, I was a lot of painting, a lot of mural work, a bit of graphic design, branding work on the side for clients and things like that, but mostly a lot of painting. And then my wife actually got an interview with it for a job over here in London. So we actually, in February of 2020, traveled to London just as the pandemic stuff was starting to become a thing. So we got here when there was maybe 3 cases in London. Or in England kind of thing. Obviously Italy was on fire.
Right, I didn't know that.
China was going crazy.
Gosh.
Yeah, Australia was being very scared.
Wild? Like, were you people talking about it in airports and stuff?
So this was, like I said, right at the very beginning. Yeah. So we went via Singapore, and there was a little bit, obviously a bit more concern there. But this was before you had to quarantine. This was before you had to do anything crazy. We were only in London for a couple of days for the interview and just to meet, feel it out and see if we wanted to move here if Denise got the job. Pretty much getting flown over for the job interview, like the last stage of the job interview was kind of like you've got the job unless you lose the job type of situation. So it was nice to come here, but yeah, that was February. And then it was a case of, it's actually been it's not only been awkward because of COVID, but it's been awkward because not knowing how long it would take to move here during a pandemic.
Yeah.
And whether that was going to happen quickly, had to go through a lot of visa stuff, we're still in the middle of it too. We got here and we just got an apartment as of yesterday. That's
really?
Tower Hamlets, so on Hackney Road there, which is awesome because it's like two minutes from Brick Lane where there's walls for me to paint and people to catch up with.
Right. Yeah. So you went to London and it was just like the tip of the iceberg. You came back to Melbourne, and as anyone in Australia viewing this would know that I guess life was normal for maybe about a few weeks, a month, and then mid-February, everything shut down. Well,
I actually, because I moved my mum from Newcastle down to Melbourne only the previous July, so in July 2019. And my mum has health issues. So I basically straight away, as of the beginnings of it being a problem and knowing that there was potential for it to get around, I kind of went in, self-decided isolation-y kind of thing. So I decided to work from home pretty much as of the end of February.
Right.
So I've been doing the home working thing for a long time now, which has been quite sad in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I'm sure your mom really appreciates that, though. That's really kind of you to kind of prioritize her. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and then as it got better, we went through that first lockdown where everybody, nobody could really see anybody, and obviously it was tricky with that because, I don't want to go see my mum, who's actually only a couple of blocks away, but also knowing that we were moving to London, not that far in the future, it's kind of hard because you want to spend time with your family. So. And the same with friends and stuff. And then obviously we came out of lockdown and we went into, I think it was stage 3. So it was kind of like, you can move around a bit again and just do the social distancing. And then yet again,
what was that? So I haven't talked to anyone in Melbourne yet, but of course, and anyone who is not from Australia watching this, so Australia almost thought that it was like we'd almost had it completely beat, and then there was a situation, and we still don't know. I thought it was something dubious with security guards, but actually it's not as clear as I thought it was. But basically, it began to spread in Melbourne. I guess this would have been in maybe June. Maybe it was, I'll check that.
Yeah. I think it was probably around that time, I would say. Look, it was reported on the news that I think that obviously the security involved in the people that were coming into the country that would have to go into quarantine, the security were kind of being maybe a little bit too lax about that. And then there's also talks of like a security guard was actually sleeping with one of the residents. And then of course these security guards go home to their families and stuff in the northern parts of Melbourne, and it all just spreads, it's a pandemic, So the thing is, of course, you could have done something small and it could have spread, or you could do something major and it could spread. So it's a case of that if you don't keep on top of it. But it's like
I know.
It's kind of like it just happens everywhere, right? Like,
I think it's almost inevitable. Even in New Zealand, where they thought they had it completely sorted, and then there was a flare up. Where you were, like, so tell me a little bit, and then I think Melbourne went into more extreme lockdown than it had ever been before. Is that right?
So it kind of started with a few suburbs really being properly locked down in the northern parts of Melbourne, and then I think they obviously realised that we shouldn't be isolating people. There was particularly a public housing block that got particularly harsh treatment, in the sense of not necessarily that they should have been locked down, but more a case of that there was a lot of cops kind of manning that space. Even though there was obviously other outbreaks in, let's be honest, white communities, middle class, upper middle class communities where, there weren't cops on every corner kind of thing, and people weren't being forced to stay indoors. So this is where, that became a big talking point, particularly during obviously the BLM movement and this kind of thing. This is just that obviously played a big factor in a lot of things there. That started, and then we went into like full lockdown basically across all of Melbourne, and then it's obviously gone further into the rest of Victoria. So Alex says hi.
Hey, congratulations on moving to London, your new job.
We went to lockdown.
And that means and what does extreme lockdown is like? You could even go out to exercise at all, or?
So it was kind of, the very last one that we were in before we left, you're allowed to exercise for an hour, but only within 5 kilometers of your residence. You are only allowed to be at your residence. You weren't allowed to have friends or family over, lot really. Essential workers only in general were allowed to work, although there's a lot to be said about who was essential and who wasn't essential.
Coffee, could you get a coffee or anything like that?
So you can go out to get food.
Right.
So you could go, one person from your family. So this is at the most extreme time.
Right.
One person from the house could go out to get food. So you could go grocery shopping once a day. So I would go and get groceries, and then you're allowed to go and get, takeaway food. So, or at least from our understanding of it all.
Yeah.
I think this is the other thing. It was kind of like a case of that it was policed harsher maybe in other areas where the pandemic was more intense. So where we were lucky. We only had reported like maybe 2 cases in the whole of our suburb kind of thing for a long period of time. So we get coffee. I get coffees for us every day type of thing. So but
that's a bit of freedom, I guess. That's nice.
And everybody had to wear masks all the time.
I was gonna say, so like in Melbourne, so in Newcastle you'll see it sometimes in like the shops, like the grocery stores, but you would just see people in masks all the time. Right.
Yeah. So in Melbourne, it was like a blanket thing. Just wear a mask unless you've got an issue with breathing, or you are literally exercising. In the process of exercising, you have to wear a mask.
Did you get fined?
Obviously there's a lot of other
was that was mandatory, so you could actually get I think you could get fined if you didn't, right?
There was a bit of a grace period. Obviously police were on it. Like I said, I think in the more restricted areas they were, in the more higher case areas there were more people on it, but look, there's a lot to be said for how people interact, and you can see people that may wear a mask but they don't seem to get the distancing stuff. Hands on stuff. For me it was I found it very hard that whole period of time, and I still find it hard now. But particularly with my mum being her immune system not being great, I was very scared throughout that whole period that that I could potentially give it to her, and literally because nobody was visiting her other than maybe myself, and I was the only one allowed to visit her. That she got it, she was definitely getting it from me. So I had to be very aware of all that, and there was points in times where you literally feel like hitting somebody in the grocery store because they're just being ridiculous, like people taking their masks off to sneeze into their hands. Do you not understand how this works?
I know.
So
I know, and I think that's the hardest thing too for anybody. Not everybody realizes that the person next to you could have, even though they're out and maybe look young, they could have someone who's really not well that they're looking after. And that's what's the hardest thing about it. I think you have to remember that.
I finally got a haircut here in London about a week ago, after months and months of looking like an absolute mess, looking like Oscar the Grouch.
Still pretty scrappy, Keo.
Down here, but up here it's not too bad, it's not too bad. Got the hat hair going, but it's fun. Used to be out here. It's crazy.
Right. So,
but a barber here, he actually told, and I hadn't actually met anybody that knew somebody that had contracted it, then passed it on, and then somebody had died. So he actually spoke about that here, because there's obviously a lot more cases here too, which is the other thing. So
we're still even when you were in London, even in Melbourne, where the cases were out of control, they were, compared to where you are now, they weren't out of control, I think. I think
that's the crazy thing, right? Like I think everybody was on edge. Everybody was stressed out. A lot of people were losing their jobs. A lot of people didn't know what was going on. And I totally understand that. I totally understand every side of the story there. But then you get here, and it seems to, COVID isn't even or at least not until very recently it wasn't even basically a news article half the time. It was more a case of them talking about it like these were the results of COVID. It's like as if it was already resolved. Like, the numbers aren't high anymore. It's like the numbers are still in the hundreds, in the thousands even,
which is
that not of concern, so.
That's fascinating. That's really interesting. Yeah.
You guys have had, Melbourne has just had, from what I've heard anyway, Melbourne has just had the lockdown extended into October. And And yet here, all you have to do is wear a mask going into a shop. That's it. You know,
Yeah,
you maybe
you
have
can
to put your
travel,
hand
I
sanitizer.
think.
That's it.
Because like,
we can travel.
yeah.
You can go to Europe and come back, but you just have to go into self-done quarantine. So, you know, you're not going to a hotel, you're just going to your house. And
that's another thing I'll mention, and I'll also link to my interview with Victoria, who was in Sweden and came back to Australia. And so the Australian government makes everyone who enters the country mandatory quarantine for 2 weeks in a hotel, which is manned or womaned by guards, and they legally cannot leave. And if they do leave, they could get arrested. So that is not.
And I'm pretty sure now you have to pay for it too.
Yes, that's changed as well.
So that's where I've actually been really concerned about this job, because my budget wasn't for a flight back, let alone $3,000 worth of quarantine time, you know. And any time that I don't spend doing work, I don't make money. Also, the British pound is a lot stronger than the Australian dollar. So me going back to work on a project that actually equates to only really half the amount of currency that I need for London. It's kind of chaotic, and it's kind of insane for me to even still be thinking about doing this project. But
I want to talk about that a little bit more. I also want to hear about your journey, but before we do that, tell me a little bit more about, like, so did you have, working as an artist and a creative, you can work from home probably in a way that a performer or a musician can't. When you like during this lockdown and everything, did you have a bit of work going when you were still in Melbourne?
So I've been very lucky. Like, I've pivoted into augmented reality.
Okay.
So, and I have a background, obviously, in a bit of animation, definitely in illustration. So a few of the projects that I had started to do for myself just before the lockdown and COVID and stuff kind of put me in good stead to be able to create work that they kind of promoted this process, basically, of creating an illustration, animation, thus mapping augmented reality. So I got a little bit of work going on that I could do from home. I could do from on the iPad or whatever.
Cool.
Obviously, there were still painting jobs, and it became very difficult because I had to not only decide, okay, are these too dangerous to go do? Secondly, do I have the right amount of time to be able to do them before leaving? And on top of that, now when I'm here in London, we're actually going to be moving into our apartment as of next week, like properly into our apartment as of next week. And we don't have any furniture. We don't have a bed yet. So, and all our stuff is on a ship, and it doesn't arrive here till October, mid to late October. So we're going to be living on a mattress that we'll buy in the living room. So talk about working from home is going to be
Keo.
a very different experience. And I've only I turned 34 in August, right in the middle of all this too. So it's kind of, it feels like what happened. I got another year older, and now things are kind of like, we're on the other side of the planet, but we're somehow
still connected.
Yet again in limbo. And
are you able to still work for your clients in Melbourne, even though you're over here?
Yeah. I am. It's been tricky because obviously communication, like talking to you right now, you know, I'd say what's the time there is probably like 7 o'clock at night or something.
Yeah. Hence the one.
Whereas here it's 10 a.m. So it's fine. You know, like I can usually get one meeting in with a client if they're available for the AM. Otherwise, I have to stay up till quite late at night to get them in the beginnings of their day, kind of thing.
Right.
So, so that's been tricky.
You'll probably be able to look for some work in London as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, I haven't. So I've had some potential jobs come through, but I'm not set up yet. Like we only just got the apartment. I don't have any tools or ladders or even a vehicle at this stage. I could potentially, you know, go and buy a bunch of paint, put in a bag, get on a train or a bus and get to the location and paint. But yet again, the cost of things here is tricky because people actually don't want to pay a lot for paintings here. At least the type of paintings that will be the early paintings for me here. And the cost of travel can be quite expensive too. So
you'll just be getting us like so when did you actually arrive in London? Was it when did you get here?
3 weeks ago. Okay. So I think it was like 16th or something of 14th of 14th of August, I think.
So very early days for you. And tell me, okay, so to fly from Melbourne to London is like 20 something hours, I would imagine, and you have to stop in Dubai or Singapore or something like that.
Yeah, so we stopped in Dubai on this second one. We were there for, I think, 3 hours kind of thing. So it goes, I think it's like usually like if you would do it straight, it would be 21 hours maybe or something, 22, but it becomes like 24, 25, I think, with the stops. So
and because, as we just mentioned, Australia you have to get special permission to leave Australia. So tell me just about like I'm sure a lot of it's a bit bureaucratic and boring, but like that's I mean moving countries in the midst of the pandemic, how long did you have to plan for? Did you have to get approval? Like did London care that you were coming?
Yeah, so Denise, having gotten the job, so she got a job with Facebook. So
cool.
So that's that's the reason why we made the plunge. Other than it being London, but they facilitated the whole move. So that became the reason why it was like, okay, well, look, we're never going to get the opportunity again for this to happen, and somebody else to foot the bill. So we'll do it. As well as we're both coming up on 35, 40. So it's like, let's just do it while we're still, before
before the apocalypse.
Well, before the knees go, before the screams of pain getting out of bed in the morning aren't as too audible.
Fall down to 140. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. So they obviously it helps that the Facebook name kind of is in the mix, because obviously the big corporate, they know they're going to pay all the things. They paid for a lot of stuff. So
cool.
I had to go through the visa process for both of us. Secondly, then it was the exemption thing, and then obviously everything else you need to do. So exemption application wasn't too hard, but obviously you need to meet, leaving the country is one thing. Coming back into Australia is the hard thing.
Yeah, so, you're right. Yeah.
So they don't care if you're leaving, because frankly, we walked into England and it took us 3 seconds to get through customs.
Really?
We literally just scanned our passport and went straight in. No quarantine over here for us, which is fine. We did have to do a COVID test before we got on the flight, but that wasn't for England's purposes. That was for flying on Emirates' purposes.
Right. Interesting.
So, yeah, it's a weird thing, because it's like Australia is locked down, but everywhere else, they're kind of like, some places are really concerned, other places, it's just like, we just want to get on with business,
So did you, were there masks on the plane and so, and did you did I see on Facebook you were you guys kind of being extra careful before you left as well? I guess just
we were. Yeah, so you actually have to you have to quarantine before you leave. So you're not, well, actually no, you have to quarantine while you're waiting for your test results.
Okay.
So
right.
we had to wait for the COVID tests and stuff like that, which becomes really tricky to, particularly during a harsh lockdown, to quarantine and then not have anybody like helping you get groceries or anything like that. So it just becomes an Uber Eats fest. But yeah, no, that was, all of it's been tricky. It's actually been extremely stressful along the way. And I think a lot of people, have it a lot worse, but for us, it's just the continual waiting on things, continual wondering when things will start, whether we, I think without the pandemic, we would have been over here in May.
Right.
You know, it would have been very quick. Whereas with all the rest of it, it's been a lot longer. So.
And then, but then you, and were you masks on the plane, social distancing on the plane as much as could be, I guess.
Well, we were in business class, which was really nice. Yeah, so that was, you know, first time. Yeah, gotta live. Yeah, living it up. But we got to experience that, which was really nice. But you know, it's a different kind of business class when you're in a pandemic, because everybody's definitely wearing the masks. There's a lot of you know, washing, which is great. You know, I was more than happy for that. But a very different experience also then with the flight attendants, because they're all, you know, it's almost like hazmated, suited up almost, you know, kind of feels.
Like you're on a spaceship.
They got the visors on, the masks, and fair enough, you know, they've got to interact with everybody on the flight. From what we could tell from the economy side of things, there wasn't any social distancing in that side of things. People had to wear masks, but there wasn't any social distancing. So I think airlines are they're given a certain amount of suggestions and actual rules when it comes to each nation. But overall, you know, they're still companies that they'll just make up their own mind. And if you as a customer decide you're fine with getting on a flight where you're sitting right next to somebody else that's a stranger in a pandemic, that's your decision, I guess.
I think sometimes you just have to, it is what it is, and you can only do so much in certain situations. And like it's not like you're going on a holiday, you're changing your whole life, like you're moving here.
Well, for us, definitely. I don't think there wasn't a lot of people, I don't think, on those flights that would have been there for going on holidays. You know, people aren't leaving Australia to come back to Australia kind of for a holiday. You know, there might have been a few businessmen, maybe, I don't know. People returning home to Dubai or London from Australia, possibly. But I think the whole moving out of Australia was maybe most of the plane, you know, so not a lot of return tickets going on there.
Interesting. And then you walked in and it took you 5 seconds to get through customs. And could you just tell me a little bit more about kind of so you've been there for 3 weeks, and you know, this is what I wonder, like I wonder if when I go back to the US, which has also been hit quite hard, like does it feel almost like normal, like people are over it, like what is it?
It's super strange because obviously, so like we said, Melbourne, Australia, everybody's very concerned. Everybody's upset or more than happy to go through all the stuff. Here, it's like people are kind of like just doing it because they know that they don't want to go into another lockdown. But you know, and I don't want to, you know, put everybody in a box. Sure. Me walking back from a paint on the very first Sunday that I was here, I walked, you know, it was late afternoon, and there were just kids, like young teenagers, 20-year-olds everywhere, all lining up, no social distancing, no masks, going into clubs.
Really?
So, and this is the heart of London. This is like the epicenter of it, where everybody is, and then everybody then would probably spread out to their suburbs after a night out. So, like I said, I had that barber that I went and saw, and he told me about how a friend of his daughter, or his sister-in-law's daughter, came home, gave it to his sister-in-law. She then had given it to their aunt, and her aunt had died.
Oh.
So, you know, like it's a strange thing, because like, and I'm painting with other friends of mine who kind of have gone, we just don't care anymore. Like, we're not wearing masks. We wear masks when we have to, but you know, they're sharing cigarettes. They don't, you know, like. Right. And you don't know who in the crowd's got it, you know, so it's like, and you feel like a bit of a dick for being the only person wearing a mask or standing a couple feet away from somebody, you know. Wow. But Like, what are you supposed to do?
No, I think it's really interesting. When I was talking to Victoria, who was in quarantine in Perth coming from Sweden, she was telling me how I think her mother would call her like freaking out about what was happening in Sweden. And she was like, oh, well, we went out to dinner last night. There was like space between the tables. And it's like, I think that
a friend of mine, Alex Zeman, who's also, used to be involved in the Roost a little bit too. He's in Sweden right now, and I messaged him a little bit before we moved over, and he was telling me, like, I'm going to work, and there's 6 people in the room right now, and nobody's really social distanced. It was just Sweden.
It's like we've kind of been resigned. Yeah, I think that'll be so interesting, and so interesting when we look back at history at how different countries, like that severity of emotion around it kind of. But then, my brother was taking it really seriously, and then I feel like he was living in my parents' back bedroom for the first few months, and then I feel like he just had a breakdown. He didn't have a breakdown, but he was like, how long am I expected to do this? And it's like, part of me gets angry, but part of me also thinks that, like, you can't tell people what to do either. And the cultural impact is so challenging too. Like, if everyone around you thinks it's wild.
I think, I think like, if we really look at the basic structure of the whole thing, I think if everybody could just go, okay, the whole world gets given access to face masks and gloves.
Yep.
And everybody for a 3-week period, just globally, just goes, okay, we're all going to wear those things, and we can still go out, we can still do our grocery shopping, but because we're both protecting ourselves, there's a much higher chance of us keeping the virus off each other. You can, like, the disposable gloves thing I hate, because I just know all that shit's going into landfill.
Yeah.
But the thing is that, how much more of this stuff is going into landfill over a much more extended period of time. So,
I know.
And with every country having a different process, it means that different countries are going at different speeds, and then you still have people coming in and out of places. It doesn't mean that, like, in 6 months' time, this is going to be gone, because, like, somebody can still move,
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
and I think it's gotten to the point now where it's like, particularly for those who don't feel like they're at risk, so the younger people kind of go, look, we'll do our best, but we're not going to worry so much anymore. As for the older people, because you see them walking around, they're wearing, like, it's basically like they've got a hazmat suit themselves up.
Well, they have to, and that's why it's so not fair.
Risk.
That's why it's so not fair. And it's also like, if the government doesn't do things to protect the people, then the people have to be it creates this very strange dynamic where you are only out for yourself. And that's why I do appreciate that Australia kind of, by implementing lockdowns and saying this is serious to everyone. If you say, I'm not adhering to this, then you kind of look like a jerk. Like, you're the one breaking the law. But if the government doesn't really care, then it's kind of like, well, so yeah.
There's a spitefulness that comes from all this, which I think is obviously extremely counterproductive. The pandemic doesn't see race, it doesn't see creed, color, social class, or anything like that. Anybody can get it. Anybody can give it to somebody else. If you've got skin, eyes, face, you could have it land on you, and you could end up getting sick. So, I think people. There's also a lot of people that think this stuff's like a conspiracy, this is like, it's like, what kind of conspiracy are we talking about here? What's this got to do with anything? It's a fucking disease. Nobody thinks the flu is a conspiracy, So.
Yeah, but I think people, that's part of the reason I've been enjoying interviewing people and having a human aspect of it, because I think, people just don't, people don't know what to read. They don't know what is true anymore. And also, I do agree that there's not just spitefulness, but there's just this darkness, this sense of foreboding, and even selfishness. And I have to check myself sometimes, because I find myself wanting to be more selfish during this time. And that's not what you want. You want us to all be in this together, like we're saying. But, this kind of protect your family and protect the ones closest to you. I don't know. It's real dark. It's real dark.
I found this, like I was saying to even my wife this morning, like, it's been so hard with moving countries because I also know that I didn't get to see pretty much any of my friends before I left. Like I got to see my mum because she lives close by, and I was definitely going to make that happen. But I got to see only a couple of my friends, and there was no hugs goodbye.
Yeah.
There was no, we can go out and have a dinner and just see each other, and that's, we know that we're moving on, or go over to a friend's place and see them. Like my friend Luke, who started the Rooster, his wife's pregnant right now. So like I would have loved to have seen him and Emma before we left, but they're northern parts of Melbourne. She works at a hospital. Like it's those, she's pregnant. Like, do you want to put any risk that involved? And on top of that, if I got it, then maybe we wouldn't be able to move.
Yeah.
Like this is
and it's a job. Like you guys are moving there, like you're relocating pretty much indefinitely, right? Like it's not like I mean maybe not forever, but it's not like a 6-month thing. Like it's a big thing.
No, it's going to be at least a few years. So my plan is to keep on traveling back to us, or at least my plan was to keep traveling back to Australia. Like I've kept my studio in Melbourne because we plan to move back to Melbourne eventually and buy a home, or put down roots, maybe have kids, who knows. But like it's like I can't just do little visits now. I can't just come back home easily. I have to go through a whole process. And for the people that it's there's been horror stories about people who have been stranded overseas when they definitely should be getting back to Australia.
I know. Yeah.
So I'm very fortunate. It's hard, but I'm very fortunate in all of this. I've also left my whole work behind. Like this is very much this is an opportunity for Denise, and I've got to figure out what I'm going to do here. I plan to do a bit more of the same of what I was doing back in Melbourne, but it's a case I'm going to be possibly pursuing a few new avenues and a few new creative processes. Maybe do a show. I've finished a book during quarantine of my works, so it's kind of funny. Finally got something solo of my own actually done that was a collection of works. So it's nice to know that at least with quarantine time, or isolation times, you can still get stuff done, I guess. But,
and it's interesting where it takes you, isn't it? Like I started doing these interviews. I taught myself to do yoga on my own, like these things that I never would have thought that I would be doing. Like, it's wild. It's wild. I don't want to take too much more of your time, Keo. Have you found any silver linings or positive aspects since this happened? Is there anything, any positive at all, or even negative? Anything else you want to add?
I guess the positives are that you do get to see, there'll be the occasional idiot, but you do get to see overall people are pretty genuinely caring and empathetic and worried about each other in these types of situations. I think it's nice to hear dialogue. It's hard because it's like a continual dialogue. People don't stop talking about it, which is fair enough. But it becomes exhausting, isn't it? It becomes a bit drowning kind of thing. That's one thing that by being actually here in London, it's been kind of nice. We haven't talked about it as much, I think, if anything, because I guess too, we're also setting ourselves up here. There's other things to talk about. So in terms of overall, like learning about working from home on your own and that, like I'm a freelancer, kind of used to it. It's not the end of the world for me. If anything, it's more of a challenge to the relationship because Denise is used to going to a job, So I think that's where it's an interesting development to see how home life works when everybody works from home.
Is she working from home as well?
Yeah, so she actually, so Facebook employees work from home until the end of the year. So she was actually working for Facebook while in Melbourne, but she was just doing amended hours so that she could line up a little bit better with London. But obviously getting her here so that she's on London time
I can understand that for
wanted.
sure. Yeah. It'd be ridiculous to try to do that long term. You'd be like, because it's,
it was becoming problematic, I think, in general anyway, because it's like you wake up in the morning and you just like, you feel wrecked. So
you're jet lagged without even going anywhere.
I guess, overall, you just learn more about yourselves. Kind of thing, so.
We've all learned a few things. Well, I'm going to stop recording, Keo, but thanks so much for taking time to chat with me this evening. I really appreciate it.
No worry, Alex.